Hello, hello. Hey, this is going to be the first lecture for Unit 4 for our new virtual online art appreciation course. Unit 4 is our last unit, and I'm going to try to break this into pieces so they're not so long or whatever. I suppose you could pause them if they're too long for you and pick them up and listen to and watch at your own pace. But we'll see how this goes. And all right, so let's get going. You know where we ended? Where did we end? We ended with some architecture in Unit 3, and based off of some of those new online test scores that you guys did, you did. I mean, looks to me like you did a really good job. I plan on setting that up, by the way, as close as I can, just so we get some sort of sense of sameness as we close out this semester for the Unit 4. And again, it's the exam, but in Canvas they call it a quiz, whatever. It's the same amount of points. I think that's what really counts. So this Unit 4, we're going to start off by looking at. Now I'm not a very good, I think I'm better at painting mainly, some sculpture. Architecture is in there, but we're going to open up this unit with some architecture. But I think the big in Unit 4 is this movement called Realism. And if you've been paying attention all semester, I've been real careful about, trying to avoid the word realistic because it becomes confusing because there's an art movement called Realism. And we'll explain that and its importance. Photography shows up, and I'm going to link that to, I think, all photography in a way. Well, not all of it, but for the most part, I'll explain. Photography, I think, is linked to realism, and it's different than what you think. You'll see. Impressionism, I know some of you have been waiting for this, but yeah, Impressionism is in the 1900s, later in the 1900s. And I see Impressionism as being related to photography. I see it as being related to realism. Then you have this Post-Impressionist group. I'm pretty sure you guys know who a handful of those you'll see. Like, oh yeah, that's where they go. Then we're going to get into this weird thing called abstraction. And I think this lecture, if I can get to it, ends with non-representational. So these would be our first examples of work that's not naturalism, right? These new movements, and they come at the very beginning of the 1900s. That's the last century. That would be the 20th century. So anyway, there's sort of like your intro, and then here's some stuff about some architecture, because the Unit 3 ended with, I think it was the Crystal Palace, and it ended with Eiffel's Tower, and we're getting into these I believe it was cast iron construction, this industrial metal architecture. One of the questions on the test was, it was due to, I think it was a cast steel. It was a true and false question. I think I highlighted steel, trying to say, hey, it wasn't steel because steel wasn't around yet. Well, not commercial steel, not industrial steel. Steel has been around. If you want to make a sword or something, yeah, you can go that type of steel. Someone's like, oh, what about samurai swords? Yeah, but they weren't making buildings out of them. In the late 1800s, right, early 1900s, you're going to get your first versions of these mass-produced industrial architectural steel. Okay, so a lot of the architecture that we're going to look at here in the beginning of Unit 4 is related to this new technology, the steel technology. And one of the first versions that it came in, yeah, that's the Brooklyn Bridge, 1883. And that's steel cable architecture that other building there on the right-hand side, that's the Denver International Airport, with a Teflon coated fiberglass roof and yeah, steel cable architecture. You can kind of see that maybe underneath that roof. As far as the Brooklyn Bridge, 1883, this was this was the biggest thing in the New York landscape. It was it was bigger than any building. We're talking 1883. No bridge in the country or building in the world used steel before the Brooklyn Bridge. You know, we look at it right now because it's so familiar to us, but in 1883, this was, you know, it was a wonder of the world and it dominated the landscape. Sure, New York was always New York, you know, 1880s version of New York. You can imagine how this would have been such a huge, colossal, new and modern. But then as you and I are looking at it, we're like, wait a second, we see some features that actually tie the Brooklyn Bridge back to sort of our art historical past. And, you know, if you know what I'm talking about, I'm looking at those arches. What type of arches are those, right? Hopefully you're writing out, well, the Brooklyn Bridge uses Gothic arches. Did they need to use Gothic arches? Did they have to be Gothic, I guess is my question. I'm going to say no, they didn't have to use Gothic. They chose to use Gothic. It's part of the design. It's part of the aesthetic. It's tying in the new with the old. I don't want to say the ancient. What are we talking about? Gothic architecture. It is pretty old, but this is also proof that Gothic architecture really never went away. Here it is again in the 1800s. We can find examples from the 1900s. Gothic style in architecture still exists. People are still using it. All you got to do is look around. So here, steel cable construction, very new, very modern. The bridge itself, you know, a huge engineering feat, but then tying in some of that design, that style to architectural past, pretty interesting. And that gets to, well, this is steel caged construction, also sometimes called skeleton and skin. That is to say that, well, the building that you and I were occupying at the campus, that was a steel cage construction. Underneath the drywall and behind the dry erase board, we would have found in some places steel beams, which allows them to sort of put, what do we call those, false ceilings? You ever notice those false ceilings, those weird tiles? You don't really see that in residential architecture. Well, not at my house, but you know, in like office architecture, they all have those little false ceilings. It's most of the time it's because they've got steel cage construction. That is the guts, the interior of the buildings. You can just sort of float around. You can move spaces. Can you imagine, right? This is your future with the cubicles, right? You can just sort of unfold the cubicle and voila, there's an office. The interior look is free, it's empty, it's clear. You know, maybe the third floor, that's a gym, and maybe the first floor, that's a bunch of shops or lobby, and that top, maybe those are, we'll divide those, we'll make those into apartments. We can do anything that we want on the inside because it's this, the steel cage is holding the whole thing up. I don't need interior walls to hold the building up. In other words, the steel carries the load, and the load is on the outside of the building, on the edges of the building. Does it matter what I cover the building with? No, as long as the steel is there, I can cover the building. Maybe you're thinking, well, gosh, you could cover that building with glass. Well, now you know where I'm headed. I'm not there yet, but once I figure out this steel cage construction, right here in the States, we get into this thing called skyscraper building. And I'm showing you an old one. This is one of the first ones by architect Louis Sullivan. Look at the date there. Dramatic pause. 1890, man, that's old. A steel cage constructed building. Now, when you were thinking skyscraper, you probably weren't thinking of the Wainwright Building, 1890, in St. Louis, Missouri. The architect, Louis Sullivan, he's a pretty important guy in the world of architecture. Um, there's a bit of a story with that. He is into up, up, up. Look at the design of the building. Knowing that the steel is underneath it, do I need any of that decoration on the outside? Look how it has a little cornice at the top, just like an ancient Greek temple, right? What is all that stuff? Like an architrave and all that, just a sort of a decorative cap. It doesn't need it, it's just there. And then look at the body of the building. Note that the horizontal design aspects are broken up, but the verticals are uninterrupted, up, up, up. And then there's that bottom portion, sort of the entry floor, right? That's where you and I are located. Did I need that separation? Did I need that, that row of, what is this, masonry? It's covered with bricks or masonry. Do I even need any of that stuff? I'm saying that's just sort of to make sense. Again, something so new is the design of it, the exterior of it is really looking to the past for inspiration. But it is something entirely new. In order for a building like this to exist, I need steel, right? I need cast steel construction, and believe it or not, I need an elevator. And lo and behold, in the late 1800s, I get both. I'm getting this industrial steel, and then and the key word here is safe, elevating system. I guess there were some elevating systems that weren't safe prior to the late 1800s. Someone needs to look that up. Anyway, once I get both these things going, yeah, vertical is the way to go, especially in these cities. Think about the difference of how they build here, right? We're in North Texas, and there's really no sense of, we got so much land. We're not going too vertical. Yeah, as we look into Fort Worth and Dallas, where the real estate is a little bit more expensive, yeah, those buildings go up. You can get a lot of building on, a small sort of parcel of land. Think on that for a moment. And then part two with this 1890. This is not a photograph from 1890. How do I know that? Well, I can see that car, right? And it's definitely not, last I checked, that's not an 1890s car, is it? Did they have cars in the 1890s? Well, if they did, they didn't look like that. I think we were still on horses and stuff in the 1890s. Imagine pulling up to this building on your horse, right? I mean, this would have been a very modern looking building. Should maybe find a color photograph of it. It makes it look really old, but this is really modern. It's really progressive. It's really new. We're just so used to seeing stuff like this. But anyway, 1890s, Louis Sullivan, right? Form follows function, from Louis Sullivan. Have you ever heard that saying? Form follows function? That's from him. His apprentice, his student, his employee, what do you want to call it, was this character, Frank Lloyd Wright. You ever seen this building before? This is called Falling Water, I guess, which is the official name? Is it Falling Water? Or Kaufman House. The Kaufmans were apparently pretty wealthy. I think they owned like department stores or something. This is in the early 1900s. I'm not that old, but anyway, they had a lot of money, and they had some property, and I believe we're in Pennsylvania. There it is. Yes, Mill Run, Pennsylvania. And there was this waterfall there, and they owned it, and they wanted a house so they could view the waterfall, and they hired Frank Lloyd Wright. Like, hey, build us a pretty cool house here. We like the waterfall. Anyway, Frank Lloyd Wright, he not only, right, builds them a house, he puts it on top of the waterfall. I don't know how you're supposed to see the waterfall if you're sitting on it, but there you go. What is so strange and cool and wonderful about this place? This is 1936. I believe the construction started in 1936. I don't think it was finished in 1936. And this is where Louis Sullivan, right, his boss, right, was going up, up, up. Frank Lloyd Wright was keeping things, look how the horizontal here is being emphasized, these sort of floating horizontal planes, and how it doesn't dominate the landscape. It wants to sit, it wants to become part of it. Naturalistic, I guess. I don't know why that's there, but it fits into the landscape. If you've ever heard of like prairie style houses, this is architecture that fits in the landscape, doesn't dominate it, it's not vertical. So somewhat different, just a different, isn't that true when you have the student sort of goes against his teacher? You guys don't need to do that. What's going on here? Yeah, we were talking about steel, and there is steel. It's present here. You can't see it, but what they're doing is using reinforced concrete. You guys remember that concrete conversation that we had? Boy, I thought that was so interesting. Anyway, concrete's back. Again, late 1800s, early 1900s, they figure out this formula for concrete. Well, this is steel reinforced concrete. I'm going to show you, I'm going to zoom in on something here a second to stress how that's being used here. Cantilevers, right? If we're going to get into some more vocabulary, cantilever. These are those horizontal planes where if we were in a physical classroom, I'd just show you. But these, let me see if my pen works. Do you see maybe like this balcony here? It's shooting out into space. Now, if this were your house, you'd want something holding it up, right? That's a cantilever. This shoots out over into space. Nothing's holding it up. What's holding it up is the gravity back here, right? The main body of the house is weighing it down. Just maybe if you were to maybe slide your phone to the edge of your desk, and then as it starts to teeter off, you just put one finger on it with almost just no effort whatsoever, and then your phone just sits right there on the edge of the desk. Now, if I move my finger right, my phone's going to fall. I don't want to do that with my laptop. Anyway, that's what's happening there. That's a cantilever. These floating spaces with no support underneath it, the support comes from the back side of it. So imagine this space here as the big anchor space with all these cantilevers shooting, these horizontal pieces shooting off of that main anchor. Right on, pretty cool. I have a different picture, we'll see. You ever heard of the open concept or the open floor plan? That is also something that Frank Lloyd Wright is using in this place, the Falling Water. You may have an apartment that maybe, let's say the kitchen ties into the living room space. There's no real dividing wall. The private spaces, such as your bedroom, they're closed off. It has a door that you can close and it's closed off. But the rest of the apartment, or maybe a house, right, where your living room and sort of kitchen flow together, maybe even flowing into a dining room space. That's an open floor concept. And then the bedrooms are isolated, maybe off of those with doors that close, maybe even a bathroom off of that bedroom. That's pretty new, right? We've just grown up with it. We didn't know it was a new thing. That's only really been around since well, here we go. Here's our example of it. Late 1930s. I think if you get into other houses prior to the open floor concept, you'd be surprised. Every room has a door that shuts. It's a box with a bunch of little boxes with doors on it. If you get into a house built in, let's say, the 1800s, the house I live in was built in the early 1900s. I think it's right around 1936. It was just built here in North Texas, though. So it's not some sort of modern work of architecture. So yeah, our kitchen has doors on it that close. You can literally shut the doors to the kitchen. One of the doors is a swinging door, like from a restaurant. Anyway, we don't use it. Looks like an accident. Uh, the rest of the rooms, however, are you can shut the doors. So this house was built, or the architect was not into the open floor concept when they built this place. Nor am I interested in knocking down any of the walls to make it an open floor concept. And this style that Frank Lloyd Wright is using for the time, it is called modern, right? You remember Gothic, when Gothic was popular in the 1200s and 1300s. They didn't call Gothic back then. They called it modern. Well, we call Gothic and we call this stuff modern. So there you go. Can you see that cantilever? Do you see what I'm talking about? Right? You want to put your hot tub on that? What's inside that? That's steel reinforced concrete. I'd like to say that it was 100% success. It wasn't. Some of these balconies started to, there's a fancy word for it. I'm going to call it fail. One like close to 7 inches of droop, right? Started to sag. Too much concrete, too heavy, not enough weight, and the thing was structurally falling apart. It's been fixed, right? They had to come back in at some point and fix that thing. It sounds like such a bargain, right? Falling Water was only $35,000, right? The final cost, the original estimation, the final cost was 155. I was like, what a bargain. Well, that's 1930s money. Today, yeah, I put into 2020, that's around $2.8 million. This doesn't sound such like a cheap deal. Anyway, look at local stone being used. And literally, if you can't tell, that's the waterfall right there. Oh, right? Can you imagine having kids? Right? Like right over the building. Boom. This is the stone it's sitting on. Right? I've not ever been there, but I've heard it stays pretty chilly. This was definitely a summer home. I think the winter there would be pretty severe. I don't think I want to be there. All right, pretty neat. What is that? Is that the barbecue? Right? Are we putting the grill there? I don't really know what that is. You tell me. Neat place. So this is sort of like a family tree. Now, the work, the design, the approach, the new architecture that is occurring in the United States by people like Louis Sullivan, by people like Frank Lloyd Wright. Over in Europe, they were watching. And what you're looking at here is, I was taught that it was called the Schroeder House, but they've got it as the Rietveld Schroeder House. Oh, there it is. This is in Utrecht, Netherlands. Now, this is 1924. We backtrack just a little bit, but I'm telling you the influences for something like the Schroeder House are actually coming from America. They're looking at the buildings of Louis Sullivan. They're looking at the residences of Frank Lloyd Wright. They're looking at the skyscraper, an American invention, right? They don't call them skyscrapers in Europe. They call them cloud scratchers. How silly. This is that inspiration, and they've simplified it. There's plaster. Yeah, there's wood elements. There's glass. In some ways, this is the early development of what we would call an international style. This style is going to be sent back to us. We're not going to call it Schroeder style or anything. We're not going to call it de Stil, which means the style in English. We're going to call it international style. So I don't want to confuse anyone. If we were to look this up, I don't think they're going to mention that this is international style. I'm saying this is the story. This is where it all begins. You don't see a lot of international style houses such as this here in the States, Most of the time we've got these plaster, glass, and then we'll use steel. Most of the time it'll be like a bank. We're going to use it for commercial architecture. One of the schools I used to work at, Plano East, had a very sort of international style approach to it. Very simple, right? What you see is what you get. Form follows function, right? That is American ingenuity taken over into Europe, right? Thought upon, simplified, boiling it down, and then actually came back to us, right? And what we call it is international style. This technically is called dish steel. It may be the only example of dish steel architecture. Now that dish steel is going to come back to you later when we look at Mondrian and his paintings. Mondrian is always pretty popular with students because it's so recognizable, but Mondrian is de style. And that's English. In English, it means the style. And it means for them universal. So international style and de style to me are almost, what's the word, synonymous? It almost means the same thing. I could be oversimplifying and messing all that up, but it helps me to sort of organize that this one thing is related to the other. Here's a couple of different views of the Schroeder house. And this is blending Wright's style with the Bauhaus, which is German, right? Sort of a German aesthetic of less is more. Getting rid of all the fancy, right? Go back to Louis Sullivan's skyscraper with all the decoration on it. They're saying, no, none of that's really necessary. These buildings are stripped almost of all their decoration. Now, when I look at these things, you know what I think about? I think about IKEA. Now, you may laugh, but then I'm looking up IKEA and I'm thinking, is it like related? Guess where IKEA comes from? Yeah, the Netherlands. Coincidence? I think not. In this Schroeder house, all the walls are movable. So talk about an open floor plan, transformable floor plan. I can move a wall out of the way, or I need a wall. I'm going to put in a wall, need some privacy. I don't know about that chair, but that's certainly less is more. Any more less than it's not a chair. I think design like this is pretty cool. It looks good. I've never lived in something like that. Like, where do you put all your stuff? And the landscaping here is horrendous. I have no idea what's going on. It doesn't match the style of the house. Less is more needs to be applied to whoever's mowing the yard here. All right, wow, here it is. So this leads us, because I said, hey, skyscrapers, new stuff. Steel, reinforced concrete, two new inventions from the late 1800s showing up in the 1900s. Louis Sullivan, Frank Lloyd Wright, Europe. And there's this thing called World War II, and these European teachers and architects, they end up coming over here. What do I mean here? I mean USA, America. And these ideas about design and materials, when you think skyscraper, that is the story. It is a story that does start here in the US, but it is taken to Europe, and it is stripped of its decoration. Remember the steel cage diagram I just showed you? Well, check out a couple of these buildings. If I were to take off that glass, what would you see? You would see what's actually holding this thing up. The glass is not holding anything up. Does anyone remember when the tornadoes came through? It was years ago. It came through Fort Worth, and they stripped a couple of those buildings of its glass skin, and you could just see straight into the guts of the building. The building itself was just fine. It took a couple of years, but they got all the glass back up. Both of these examples that I'm showing you, I believe, are from, Van der Rohe. Ludwig Mies van der Rohe is the architect here. So I think So here's, one's not labeled. It doesn't matter. So the lever house is, which is not a house, it's the skyscraper right here. That to me, when I say, hey, skyscraper, if there's one that really goes back to this idea of what we think of, or at least what I thought of as a skyscraper, these huge glass boxes. This is Midtown Manhattan, right there on Park Avenue, New York City. In 1952, man, this fits into the little story I'm telling. This is after World War II. And this is the second, there it is, the term, the second curtain wall skyscraper in New York City, just after the United Nations Secretariat building. But this is the one, to me, like, this starts off the epicenter of these giant glass box buildings that we now refer to as skyscrapers. You could look to Dallas and say, yeah, we have versions of this. You can go to Fort Worth, you can look around and say, oh yeah, this is where it's coming from. That is the story. This one's not labeled. I'm thinking that's the Seagram building. I think. Maybe, can you guys do Google image search or something? Anyway, I know it's Mies van der Rohe, but it sure looks like the Seagram building. These are beautiful. Talk about sort of monuments to the new, and very simple, stripped down, but elegant in a way. There's a math to them, and believe it or not, I still see, they're like, oh, decoration, you don't need it. I still see, do you see what I see? I see at the top, this segment there is sort of different from the body here. And then down below here, can't really see it, but I bet you there's sort of a ground floor type of organization. I'm just saying that these boxes still seem, I can do it again over here, still seem to have this sort of 1, 2, 3 type of organization. You guys see what I see? They just can't get away completely from the old, right? The continuity of architectural understanding that we've had since ancient Greece, sort of the top and the middle and the floor, the entry. Although it's not needed, it just sort of visually makes sense. Yeah, that may be overthinking it a bit. Hey, we've got some cool stuff. This is the Margaret Hunt Hill Bridge. It sounds so fancy, Spur 366. This was finished in 2012. Now think on it, if this is steel, this is, what is it? Not steel cage, steel cable, right? And the single loop, the single arch, less is more. If I pull one bolt out of this thing, it seems like the whole thing would collapse. Like, you can't take any more away from this type of architecture. Very simplified, very stripped down. Think about the the Brooklyn Bridge and how sort of elaborate it is compared to this with its Gothic arches. The arches are necessary because it holds up those center pylons. The point is that it didn't need to be Gothic. But this, gosh, if you take anything away, it seems like, man, everything here is necessary, but everything here is also part of the design. So I can't take anything away. Stripped, an international style bridge. I made up that international style. I'm just saying it's so simple. This is the Stata Center at MIT. This is a real place. You may be thinking, hey, he's fooling with us. This looks crazy. No, it's a real place. Frank Gehry is the architect. This is the Stata Center. This is MIT, the school. All these different materials, all these different spaces. This term deconstructivist, this is finished in 2004. You know, architecture has rules. And I think when you start fooling around with the rules, such as a deconstructivist would, now what does that mean? Breaking the rules, taking it apart, revisiting the old standards and saying, no, now I've got these materials, steel and steel reinforced concrete, and I got titanium, I got all this new stuff, right? Teflon, whatever. I can start sort of making architecture that's not simple and elegant, but maybe confusing, right? On purpose, which I think is good. I think it's neat to look at, right? Because now really we can understand architecture. Maybe not for the first time, but in a way it's like, oh, you're thinking more sculpture. Um, or maybe what looked good on paper years ago, we would say, well, yeah, it looks good on paper, but it's just impossible to build. Well, now anything, it seems, is possible. But I want to go back to the fact that the reason there are rules for architecture is because most architecture sits outside. Are you aware of architecture that sits inside? So here's a little bit. In 2007, how many years? So it was built in 04. 3 years later, MIT had to sue somebody. Why? What's going on here? Providing deficient design services, which there should be a comma in there somewhere, which caused leaks to spring, masonry to crack, mold to grow, yipes, drainage to back up, and falling ice and debris to block emergency exits. And then I think, well, yeah, because, buildings, as much as we think they're art and sculpture, shouldn't they still have to function safely, right? Who wants to live or go into a building or go to school in a building that seems to be falling apart? Well, I'd be interested in how much money they got out of it. But yeah, you follow me? There's a reason why you have a roof that sheds water and the water wants to get away from the foundation. And, they're just sort of some laws that we sort of abide by, not because, design is because it just makes sense. It rains around here, and I can't imagine living in a place where it snowed half the year. Is it cold like that up there? I don't know. I don't really care. I don't plan on going up there. You may recall this building. This is framing you all the way back to Unit 1. But that was a Frank Gehry building. Can you see the connection of this guy deconstructing architecture? Hey, there's a definition. Movement of postmodern. That means after modern architecture, which I'm of the opinion that there should be a comma before the which. Now, if I don't want to do that, then I'll use the word that. Someone needs to fix this. Deconstructivism is a movement of postmodern architecture that appeared, see, no comma, but there should be a comma, which appeared in the 1980s. Look, no apostrophe S. The 1980s don't own anything. It's plural. 1980s. Check it out. It gives the impression of the fragmentation. Why am I reading this to you? Anyway, there's a definition. Yeah, he's breaking up these spaces, but man, they are confusing. When I go in a building like this, here's where I'm at. I want to know where the bathroom is, right? And if Frank Gehry's, fooling around with me, I'm not for it, right? Show me where the bathrooms are. Wow, no segue. This is a photograph. Well, yeah, I said at the beginning, 1800s photography is invented. They've already seen it up there. It's invented right around 1837. The more sometimes I go back and revisit some of the info in here, I'm pretty sure it's somewhere around 1837. Let's, for just our sake, say, hey, around 1837. This is a photograph. This is for us, maybe our first photograph. This is an official photograph, 1839. And it's of and listen to my words, a busy Parisian boulevard with horse carts and people and lots of people walking and so busy. What's the problem? You don't see anyone. I'm going to circle something right here. Here is the first person, 1839. Do you see this guy right there with his foot up here? This is someone getting his shoes shined for whatever reason that's hard for me to say. Shoes shined. he was holding still. These early photographs, right? It's not like something that you have like on your phone. You click it and it keeps a picture. The exposure time, the amount of time you had to expose the chemicals that were probably on a glass or metal plate. We're not talking an image that would spit out a machine that would spit out an image on paper. That's years away. They had to be exposed to light. Okay. And the exposure time, it could be 11 minutes, right? It could be 15 minutes. And if you're not holding still, such as these buildings, they would not show up in the image. Well, apparently this guy getting his shoe shined was holding still long enough to where everyone else in the image, you can see the shadows maybe with the trees, and there's no other, where are all the carriages? Where are all the other people? Not holding still, so we can't see them. What's the camera doing? The camera is recording what the viewer sees. Now, that may sound redundant and kind of silly for someone to say to you, but think on it just for a moment, because we've been looking at sculpture, we've been looking at prints, we've been looking at paintings. We were looking at this idea in the Baroque about informality, about people maybe getting ready for the painting to start. And I was like, well, that's really a kind of a complicated conversation. Paintings can take months to do. Sometimes paintings can take years to finish. So there's really that informality is fake. Then you have people that are wanting to look informal, but they're not pulling it off. Well, then you got this thing called artifice. It's just artificial. It's not working. Well, these cameras, right? By 1880, the Kodak Corporation, they're making cameras affordable for everyone. And then you start getting these images, not by the wealthy, not of the wealthy, not for the wealthy. Finally, a little tool in your pocket that you could take a picture. The camera came loaded with 100 shots. You sent it back to Kodak. They developed your images. They'd send them all back to you, and your camera was reloaded with 100 fresh shots. So these early, they're black and white on that, but they're what people, for us, it is what people are seeing. And it's not, it helps understand as to why in the 1800s, where does all the religious painting go? Right? Where are all these gigantic historical narratives? Where are all these people looking to these ginormous epic, I don't know, narratives to make these monumental paintings out of? But instead you're getting like, oh, well, this is my grandfather's funeral, right? Or, oh, here's a guy working in the fields. What? Why are you doing that? Well, my experiences, when I say my, it's the royal my, right? Our experiences become the topic, the subject matter of painting, because they're in the 1800s, they're being seen as something that is worth recording. I want to taint your brain by saying, I believe cameras are what really cause this movement to be pushed forward. And I'm going to come back to that idea that cameras have influenced art heavily in the 1800s. And I don't mean that everyone's working from photography. I assume they are. So what? That's not the point. I'm saying that the idea that your own experiences of just everyday stuff, maybe you folding the laundry, or you out there hanging out by the pool, right? Are you reading a book? Are you guys reading books? I don't know. Whatever it is that you do, your daily stuff, that becomes content. That becomes subject matter. And therefore these bigger, grander, epic things, they never really go out of way. They don't go away. They somewhat fall out of fashion. So think on that. When these cameras show up, these are regular people recording regular activity, right? And if there's a definition to realism, it is based on this conversation. It is based on the fact that realism has nothing to do with style. So if you're looking for what's a realist style, you've already messed up. Realism is about content, not form, and I'm using my words correctly. Form, there's a variety of different styles or forms, right? The appearance of realism is there's not one, but the content is the same. Realists try to record things they can observe from life. Right? Academic art seemed false and used. If I were to go through some of the pictures in your phone, I'm assuming you've got a phone. Maybe you're listening to me on a phone. I'm not going to go through your phone and look at your pictures. That's weird. But some of those pictures are going to be things you've recorded from life. Right? Am I wrong? I know I'm 100% right. You're recording things. Now, to what degree, particular aspects of life, I don't know, right? That's up to you. But there's probably maybe a photo of you at a party or a birthday party, maybe a pretty sunset. Just think, maybe who are these people that are taking pictures of food and putting them online constantly? I don't understand that. Anyway, these are things that you have experienced and you're recording them. Now you're doing it with a little magical digital thing in your pocket. These people in the 1800s, they're doing it, right? Still using paint on canvas. They're not breaking away into a new medium, although eventually photography does become its own fine art. It didn't put painting out of business, did it? Right? And it is in a way eventually maybe some competition. Yeah, cameras can record things pretty quick and pretty accurately, but in the 1800s, cameras, they're not doing color. So I don't think there's people are running into the streets worried they're going to not have a job. There is a great YouTube video. I think it's on my YouTube. Do I have a YouTube channel now? Anyway, it's The Case for Realism. If you go to that, I've collected a bunch of art videos. And The Case for Realism, I'm not going to click on it, otherwise it's going to start playing. I don't want to do that. It really does explain well this idea of what a realist is. Well, we're going to keep talking because I'm going to explain what I think a realist is. And here is, if you went to, it's so tricky. If by chance you ever get to go to the Dallas Museum of Art, you may run across this painting by Courbet. It's called Fox in the Snow. You guys recall some of the other paintings from, I don't know, we can go back to Rococo images. You can go back to Baroque images of landscapes if you want. You can go back to the Renaissance, whatever. Are those really images of nature? Or is nature so idealized? It's pretend, isn't it? Fragonard's The Swing is pretend nature. That garden is not real. You don't lay down in the grass, right? I don't. You get ants and stuff. You guys know what chiggers are? It's horrible. I feel as if Courbet he's a realist. He's painting from experience. And look what his comment about nature. Does nature look like it's providing a nice space for anyone here? Is nature some sort of pleasure ground in which we can sort of roll around and enjoy ourselves? Or is nature rough? Is nature lean? Right? Nature is not your friend, is I think one of the attitudes Courbet has. French realist painter. Fox in the Snow, if we were to look closely, that fox is just tearing the heck out of some sort of varmint. I don't know what it is, some sort of field mouse. Hey, his problem. Big fish eat the little fish, right? In this barren, desolate, cold uh, winterscape, the little droplets of blood as the fox is tearing into his meal here, it's pretty harsh. It's rough. Life is rough. Courbet is saying nature isn't here to provide for you. You must provide for yourself. Now apply this to right now. Apply this to business. Apply this to your own advancements in whatever it is that you're doing. Think about politics and whatnot. You know, we sometimes have this idea that someone's just going to knock on our door and like, hey, you're the greatest, we need you. No, you have to go out and get it. So this is a metaphor, a visual metaphor for all these ideas about the world and society. But Courbet, he's not some sort of grand gesture, not some historical grand narrative, not borrowing from Shakespeare or anything like that. He's saying, no, from my own experience, I see this. No, did he see a fox tearing into a mouse? I don't know. But I know that Courbet likes to work from his own observations. Fox in the Snow. If you ever get a chance to see it, go check it out. Local. This is Courbet's The Stonebreakers. Think upon all the images that we've seen throughout the course of this semester. How many times have peasants, are we going to call these people peasants, laborers, right? It's the early 1800s. I'm going to call them laborers, peasants, right? Definitely beyond working class, lower, nothing wrong with it, but, hand laborers. How many times they show up in fine art? Think on it. I'm struggling. Or let's say, well, how many times do they show up in fine art and they're treated with some dignity? I could probably find something where they, they're being depicted as fools, right? Or they're being used somehow to kind of like make fun of like, peasant tradition, right? That's always good for a laugh. Is Courbet doing anything like that with these stonebreakers? This guy here looks a little bit too old for the work that he's doing, and he's all leathery and is dark, out in nature, right? This is definitely not Rococo nature. This guy to me looks a little bit too young to be out here. Like, what? Don't you have any ambition? Like, what are you doing? Right? He's out there breaking up stones. What do I need to break up stones for? People's gardens, maybe for roads inside the city. I mean, someone's got to do it. I'm not taking away from the work. I'm not making a comment about laboring, right? Listen, I've had my fair share, trust me. My comment here is that Courbet treats this with a seriousness, right? And he treats it with not as fools, not as drunks. Look at the size of this thing, 8 feet 7. Am I dyslexic? Let's not get on to that. 8 feet 6, 8.5 feet, let's say. That's a huge painting. Paintings of this size were typically devoted to historical narratives, right? Or biblical narratives, something, Moses parting the seas or something. But what does he put? The stonebreakers. And he says, yeah, this is worth talking about. This is worth thinking on. And yeah, the work they're doing is important. And these are people and they are important. And you know what? They don't get to show up in academic art because for some reason we think it's not worth the time. And I'm saying, no, I disagree. And then, yes, here, I'll be the first. And you know what? He's right. There is something to be thought upon here. Now, I'm not talking about style. Hopefully I've not slipped into, because Courbet has a style. Style has nothing to do with it. You see how I'm talking about content? And yeah, here's a sad little note. Yeah, destroyed 1945. What was going on in Dresden in 1945? Wonder if there's a if, if if there's a copy of this somewhere. Here, this is Eakins, Thomas Eakins. Now this is an American. So this is, hey, America, we're showing up with an American artist. There were some other American artists prior to Thomas Eakins, right? I'm not going to try to fool you, but I mean, isn't Thomas Cole? Wasn't he like, he's American? This is he should be in here somewhere. But anyway, this is America right in the thick of things as realism is taking off and it's a movement. We've got a realist movement here in the States, USA, America as well. Here's an example, Thomas Eakins. This is the Gross Clinic. Now, some of you may be thinking, hey, this is very similar to that Rembrandt painting. Is that here? Of course you didn't put it in there. Oh gosh, I've gone blank. Anyway, I know hopefully I showed you a Rembrandt painting. You have that what was it, like an autopsy or just the dissection of that guy that got hung for who knows what. Anyway, Eakins is sort of tapping into. Now I'm going to say something about style. Eakins' style is very much like Rembrandt, right? He's I'm going to say the Tenebrasso. He likes that dramatic lighting, does he not? That's a style thing, but that style doesn't make him a realist. What makes him a realist? What makes him a realist is the content. The Gross Clinic, Dr. Gross here, right? Carving away. I think you're amputating a guy's leg. I don't know what. They're definitely taking something, some slivering going on here. This is the guy's backside. This guy here they probably soaked a towel in ether. Is that what they're using? Anyway, it's knocked him out. And then, yeah, they're all whittling away at his leg. I'm not sure what the point is. Look, no gloves. What? Disgusting. And where is his mask? Oh, I know. It's because it's the 1800s. They weren't doing things like that. Ha ha ha. And then you die of an infection. This is either his wife or his mom. She is not doing well. And then this is the lecture hall. There's a guy like taking notes, right? Here's you sleeping. This guy's looking at his phone, right? They're students, and he's lecturing and he's explaining. He's saying, here's what's going on. That's the narrative. Is it monumental? Is it epic? Is it historical? No. It's all very local and, according to Eakins, very factual. I'm just trying to report the facts. I'm trying to be an observer. I'm trying to show you what I observed. I tend to think he's exaggerating just because of the way the thing is lit. It is very dramatic. And can I use the word gross? Right? Am I going to get anything for that? Now, this is, have you heard of the Amon Carter Museum in Fort Worth, Texas? Well, if you haven't, you just did. There is a painting called The Swimming Hole. There it is. I've seen it. Look how it's sort of a sequence of events like, oh, I'm just lounging on this rock. And then I sort of get up in this very dramatic way. And then I stand in a very dramatic way. And then I jump into the water. I swim back to the rock. I'm now getting out of the rock. And then do you see this? And then you go looking around, and I found an old black and white photograph. Guess who took that photograph? Thomas Eakins. So I'm saying, hey, we're going to talk about linking sort of some realist painting to photography. And I'm not saying all realists worked from photography. That's not the point. I'm saying it seems as if Thomas Eakins was using photography to help influence his work. I'm seeing a direct connection between the two. Now, that's just me looking, right? It could be just a bizarre coincidence. But I'm fairly certain at this point that there's got to be a connection between the two. I wonder if Thomas Eakins owned a camera. And if so, did he take pictures with it? And if so, did he take pictures of these models jumping off of this rock on a lake next to some trees? There's a lot of coincidences going on. What's up with these poses? I guess they're trying to look like, you know, what is that, Hellenistic statues or something. The point is here with realism is that there is very little idealization. They are trying to be factual. And I'm showing you these two side by side to point out that this stuff, this guy's name is Bouguereau. What are we going to call this? Like satyr and nymphs or something, right? A satyr is one of these goat-legged people. And these are like water nymphs. That's mythological. That's old academic content. And then I'm going to compare it to Eakin's work over here. This is the artist's studio. Now his artist is a carver. He's carving this statue. She's posing. Here's his model. This is her chaperone. This could be her sister or an aunt, someone, right? To make sure nothing special is happening. To vouch for her, right? Her virtue. And I'm saying, hey, you know what? It's not about style, because you could say, well, this style is very terrific, but it's not realism, is it? And you could say, well, actually, this style, we're not really talking about style. They are very different in style, but this is realist content. Now, how is that? Because this is as if someone snapped a picture inside the artist's studio and has recorded the things that they observed. Now, again, I'm not going to look through your phone, but I'm fairly certain I'm not going to see something like this going on, right? Otherwise, me and you need to hang out more. And just the water nymphs and how does this even work? Is she on the water? It's like someone photoshopped in painting, and everyone's so smooth and everyone's so porcelain and perfect. And it's all like, oh, this is all fun. I don't want anyone pulling me into this water, right? I'm just curious as to like, isn't this really just a fancy way to kind of get away with nudity? And are these real, there's the word, are these real figures? Because when I look back at Eakin's painting, I'm fairly certain that's a real figure. Do you note that her proportions are, can we say, honest? There doesn't seem to be a lot of airbrushing going on. There's no stretching of her proportions like in ancient classical Greek sculpture. Was that 7.5 to 8 heads tall? And then when you somewhat apply it to yourself, it's like, well, yeah, maybe that's my proportions match that, but not everything is like a Greek statue, and therefore you get the there it is, the reality of the figure. This may be the first actual real figure we've seen all year. These are fake. They're just not real. There's not any real, like, that's why this is fantasy. Years ago, there was a show called Cops. I think it's still a show. And it was reality TV. Think on this for a moment. When Cops came out, reality TV. It was like one of the first reality TV programs. And it was fascinating to watch. And it was supposedly real people, real events. And then you click the channel over and it was some sort of pre-written fake applause, situation comedy where everything was scripted and practiced and camera placed perfectly, and the situations were, there was a beginning, a middle, and an end, right? And it fit perfectly within 30 minutes with like 4 commercial breaks. It was hard to go back to that. And think on that today, once reality TV, as we say around here, once the cow left the barn, it was somewhat difficult to put it back. And reality TV, or what we think of as reality TV, has sort of, I mean, it's taken over. Now we're being fooled into thinking some reality TV is reality, which is crazy and bizarre and weird. But to some degree, think about maybe a show like The Office, which blended the two, blended the reality aspect of cameras falling around these goofballs at their paper, what was it, Dunder Mifflin Paper Company, and we just happened to be kind of eavesdropping in on their goofball conversations. That was sort of a hybrid of the reality and script. But then you get into shows like, I don't know, pick whatever, some of these, I'm going to build you a house in 20-minute type shows. That's all scripted, right? Who are those jokers in Waco? All that's all scripted. That's not actual reality. I wouldn't even think, I don't watch it. I'm fairly certain the Kardashian show isn't really a reality show. It's presented as reality. That's because it's cheaper to do that. But anyway, why am I talking about this? The point is, Eakins and Courbet and Damier and these other realists, once you get this out, it's really hard to go back and look at this and take it seriously. How do I take this seriously when there's this stuff, which is actually something I'm more familiar with? And no, I'm not familiar with being arrested. I thought Cops was just a neat show. I still watch Cops. Whatever. So I am going to introduce this guy, and you're thinking, hey, you misspelled Monet. No, I didn't. This guy's name is Manet. This is your bridge between the realist group, because Manet is a realist, first and foremost. But he is going to also, one foot in realism, he's also putting his other foot. Now he's talking about, here's a guy who says, well, here's what I'm going to paint. Here's the content, right? My life, my observations, things I know. But I'm also curious as to how one paints. Now that's about style. So depending on what version of Manet you want to talk about, I'm going to talk about him as a realist. But in some conversations, he may show up as an impressionist. Whoa. You're like, oh, really? This guy? Yeah, this is the guy. So to begin, there is an annual salon in France. France, the art industry is promoted by the state. So there's an annual salon. And if your work got into the annual salon, I mean, that means you're a success. You're on the map. If you're making it and winning at the annual salon, you're doing good. There is also in 1863 a separate show called the Salon of the Rejected. I can't say that in French. Because so many people are trying to get into the annual salon. Well, so many, they're like, hey, listen, these are the pieces that didn't make it. Here's the actual salon. Here's the Salon of the Refused, right? And the work that shows up in the rejected salon, right, the B-level players, actually was getting a lot of traffic. People wanting to go see, maybe there's something there you can have a good laugh at. Like, haha, you didn't make the big show? You must be a disaster. Well, not necessarily, because here we're talking about Manet. I don't know if I'm talking about anyone who got into the actual salon. Maybe Bouguereau made it into the actual salon, right? And Manet is doing something important. It's doing something that Bouguereau certainly isn't doing, right? Manet's asking questions. What makes content and art acceptable? Can I show nudity as long as it's water nymphs, right? As long as it looks like something from mythology? What makes things okay? What's acceptable content if I just show things constantly from the ancient, from the old? Is it labels? If I show someone's girlfriend and just call it a Venus, is that okay? And so he's asking some questions. He's in the forefront. He's thinking, wait, why do we keep doing, why is there a bourgeois group that seems to be, getting all the attention? In the 1800s, bourgeois is getting all the attention. But here we are, we're talking about Eakins, we're talking about Courbet, we're talking about Manet. And Manet is going to say, no, 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 no. He's going to wake everyone up. Here is Manet's Luncheon on the Grass. Now, what makes Manet's Luncheon on the Grass so controversial? The Luncheon on the Grass, I think, is its second name. Its first name was called, I think, The Bath or The Bather. Anyway, who's taking a bath? Well, she is back there. You see her? And, what is she bathing is the question. And what's up with what's going on here? Right? She seems to be sans clothes. Well, here are her clothes here. She's nude. And isn't she more nude because these guys aren't? And it gets into this complex conversation of, why is it always female nudes showing up in these shows, in these galleries, dominated by men, dominated by the male gaze? And Manet is saying, yeah, because we're using women to get attention, and we're giving them clever titles in order to get away with it. Look what Bourgeois did, right? With this, he's totally getting away with that. It's just a big nudie show. But when Manet does this, they're like, oh, Manet, you're horrible. Ugh. Right? This is pornography. Yuck. Why? Well, Manet didn't dress up his, now for us this looks old, but these are, fairly recent, I don't want to call it costumes, but this is what, guys were wearing in the mid to late 1800s. I mean, they're certainly not dressed up in robes like they're, from ancient Greece or something. And they don't have hairy goat legs either with fake goat ears. It's all very confusing, right? Actual guys hanging around with a nude lady? How dare you? And yeah, if you start taking it apart, yeah, there's her hat, there's her clothes. All right, something's been happening. You guys have seen enough iconography to know what fruit that you pluck and peel means, right? You can fill in the blanks there. There's even a sort of an almost empty bottle of liquor here. I mean, something's been happening. I think there's even a toad somewhere. Yeah, I think right here, which is slang, French slang for prostitute. So yeah, we don't know it just by looking at it. Maybe after I just explain it to you. I mean, he's talking about like sex stuff, right? Very adult stuff. This is not, Fragonard with his the swing. We have someone sort of break it down like, oh wow, that's kind of adult theme there. That swing, it looks so innocent. There's nothing really innocent about this. I don't think it's something that you first looked at and like, well, I don't see the problem. But when you really break it down and you really discover what Manet is doing and how he's doing it, and he also has studied art, and he knows iconography, he knows art history, you're like, oh no, he's really pushing people's buttons that also know about art. And he's asking questions. Why do you have a problem with this? What, I got to dress these people up as if they live in the 1300s and then it's okay? Is that what's going to make it safe for you? Well, people were horrified. Not only that, they also looked at the way Manet was painting. And it's fairly, compared to art, right? Academic art of the 1800s. Look at Bourgeois again, right? The good stuff, right? The big hitters. They're areas of flatness, almost areas of unfinishedness. And Manet is actively also thinking about, well, how does one paint a painting? And he's doing everything on purpose. He's not by accident. He's being influenced by the things around him. And a lot of that isn't ancient images of how one records a painting, how one makes a painting, or what an image should look like. Now his content, his theme, I say he's a realist, but he's a bridge. Because when I show you these, which are very old, the Judgment of Paris up there, which, listen, if you can't see that he's borrowed from the Judgment of Paris, I have no help for you, right? Look at those two things. But the Judgment of Paris, I think, is also from the 1500s. I'd have to double check. I know the Pastoral Concert by Giorgione or Titian. Now, that's not me asking. That just means they're not sure. I think Giorgione worked for Titian, or Titian worked with Giorgione. Anyway, do you guys see the connection between the two? This has two nude females there on the lower left, and then two guys completely dressed. Well, these guys are dressed like this is 1510. And Manet reminds his critics, like, hey, wait a second, why are these two images considered like classic academic icons of painting? But when I tap into the same theme and all I'm really doing is putting it into contemporary setting, I'm a pornographer. You guys don't know what you're talking about, right? I'm pushing art forward. Let's quit talking about, right, stuff that happened, right, 400 years ago. And by the way, when Giorgione or Titian painted this, did he dress up his guys in clothes from 1500 from 1100? No, these guys are wearing clothes that people wore in the 1500s. Like, what are you doing? Quit thinking about the past as your band-aid to getting around, putting in these nude figures. I'm hoping you're not missing that there's nude figures here, right? These guys, I think everyone's nude here. Looks like a party. Anyway, yes, he is being sexual. He's being adult. But he's also rubbing people's noses in the fact that you guys like to play pretend, and you're not ready for art that talks about now. Now, what type of art does that? Realist art talks about my own experiences, my own observations. Now, I know we've all been walking through the park and have stumbled across nude people, right, just sitting in the grass. Well, not me. Maybe that's what was happening in 1860s France, but anyway, direct observation, maybe. Who am I to say? Next, I think it was the next year, the following year, this is Manet's response to all of his critics. It is Olympia. Now, hopefully, again, you are making a connection to a Renaissance piece. Did I put that in there? Of course I did. This is oil on canvas, not small. His Olympia, I made comments. I'm just going to switch to the next one. I made comments about this Venus. Remember Venus of Urbino? And I made jokes maybe about that. Like, wait a second. She seems to be, she's looking at you. She's got to look to her, right? And it's this sort of, come hither attitude. And it was kind of a, sexual and very adult. And look, she's on a bed and the dog is asleep. All these sort of like, whoa, that's kind of heavy duty. Check out when Manet, when his female looks out at you. It's really kind of a confrontational look. I don't see that as sort of a come hither, or it's not the same attitude as the Venus of Urbino. Now, that could be me, right? Maybe reading into things. This model here is the same model here. It's the same person. Now, I'm telling you, this look here is not the same as the Venus of Urbino look. And he is calling out the fact that what I was trying to talk about in class is that somewhat being an adult image, where the Venus title was put on there as a label of convenience to kind of get away with talking about some very adult themed stuff. And again, when the body is being used to talk about sort of ideas and is being used as iconography and metaphor, whatever you're going to be, yeah, that's nudity. But when the body is simply there to be selling flesh, earthly sexuality, I mean, yeah, that's what it's representing. Those are different types of images. And Manet is calling attention to that. Why are the cats different? Is someone, are there two versions of this? Look, the cat is sitting there, and then the cat is stretching there. I don't know. I'm losing my mind. I'm going to stick with this one. I like this one better anyway. Yes, the same games are being played here. Note that there are flowers. I'm pointing to my screen. The flowers here, right, being presented as a gift, right? Same as she's clutching the flowers here in her hand. The roses, right, for Venus. But we see that these are a gift. I mean, these are a gift from a client, right? And yeah, she's very nude. Got it. Check. And the left hand and all that. Got it. Got it. Very similar. But now she's got her little shoes on here. Look at the bottom of her shoes. They're filthy. Well, she's a streetwalker. And then we were called the dog, and it represents fidelity. And look, fidelity's, taking a break. Ha ha ha. There's the cat, the bordello, the cat house, and what it represents. He's not making. I like how there's the curtain here and the curtain here is of things like here's the show, and then this, which I'm not really sure what that is, but I know this is a Japanese screen. This Japanese style stuff is the rage in France in the late 1800s. And Manet's tapping into that. It's one of the things he likes. He likes the outline of the Japanese print. Look at the flatness here, and then it's sort of filled in between these outlines. Guys, that's the beginnings of sort of an impressionistic attitude. And it's sort of brushy and loose, very impressionistic. Do you guys understand the game that Manet is playing here? He has shoved painting into taking realist content, and he's beginning to talk about, oh, how does one make a painting? And no, I'm not going to be talking about the past 500 years ago. I'm going to talk about the here and now and the things that I know and the things that I experience. Well, you guessed it, Manet. Yeah, he probably did go visit maybe a bordello, right? I don't know. Guys did that. I know Manet eventually gets syphilis, but I think everyone got syphilis in the late 1800s. Not everyone. Well, he did. So hey, thank you, Manet. You made the art world wake up and get out of the mythological past that they've been celebrating for like 500 years. Like snap out of it. Boom. So let's all thank you, Manet. Well, that's going to lead right into this impressionistic group. Yeah. Impressionism. Think about it. It uses realist content, but is actually more interested in the form, not the content. Think on it. Impressionists are interested in how one records a painting. But what are they recording, guys? They're recording things that they are observing from, as best they can, real life, to the point of actually going outside and painting nature in front of them as it's happening. Maybe I don't know. Let's just say 50% of the painting right there on the spot. That really wasn't done before the late 1800s. You couldn't do it. Why is that? Because two paints weren't invented yet. I can take my two paints. I can take them out into the field, literally, and I can record things that I'm seeing as they're changing right there in front of me. You can't deny the influence of photography, right? Recording things that you can observe, right? Things that you experience. That's photography, straightforward. Japanese prints, I just mentioned talking about Manet and his outlines in that Japanese screen. Japanese prints, I may have an example for us to look at. They're very much stylistically, not only in the way they're making their images. I mean, you can even see it in Van Gogh's work as well. You can see it in Gauguin's work as well. These are later guys, but the influence is strong. They're influencing the style of these impressionist painters. and compositionally as well. I'm gonna have to mention the way they organize the material is very different from an academic sort of classical formal approach. They're going to use some Japanese compositional tools. And then interest in light, most definitely. And if you're talking about a guy maybe like Renoir, you're talking about a guy like Monet, the actual Monet, not Manet. Yeah, they're more or less interested in, hey, whatever the stuff is, great. But I'm actually recording the light as it hits the stuff. So if that happens to be some water lilies, great. If it's some haystacks, great. If it's the front of a building, great. There's some stuff. I'm interested in the light. Again, another video, yeah, I'm using YouTube, connected to my channel, is a really, these aren't very long. It's maybe like 10 minutes. I don't even think it's 10 minutes, but sort of summarizing Impressionists. I like that series. I don't get anything like monetarily if you watch it, but they've got good images and good info. It's sort of like a compressed information. And for what we're doing here, it works out great. And as popular, I like to stress this too, as popular as an Impressionism was or is, it really only existed as a collective group for a very short amount of time. I think it's actually longer. Yeah, I would say 1870s, sure. It didn't end 1880. I think it's maybe 16 years, 1886. I don't know who put the nail in the coffin. I think Monet, he worked into the 1900s. So there's definitely, I just think as a group, about, I don't know, 15, 16 years. But what an impact, right? Let's see. Let's click forward. Whoops. Here we go. So there may be a glitch here. I'm opening up with Monet. This is the painting. If we're wanting to know, where does Impressionism get its name? It's actually from this piece. What? This is called Impression Sunrise. And yeah, that's Monet, not Manet. Impression Sunrise, 1872. Can you go back and think, think on Bouguereau, even think on Manet? This thing's pretty loose, right? I mean, isn't it really about blue and orange? And am I seeing like bits and pieces of the raw canvas? Like what? This isn't a finished painting. Yeah, this is like the impression of a painting. It's really kind of steam and color, isn't it? That name, the moniker Impressionism, it came from an art critic. When it saw this piece and some of the other impressionistic pieces, there was a show or in a gallery, I forget. And that label was not a label of positivity. It was a label of negativity. Yipes. But for whatever reason, it stuck. It stuck. It took. Impressionism is now what we call this group. So it's one of those things that was a derogatory label. Anyway, it does describe it, doesn't it? This is probably what you're thinking of when you're thinking of Monet. Check out these water lilies. Gosh, they are neat to look at. Not going to deny that. They kind of, some of those elements and principles and the science of color and line. And I mean, do these things kind of relax you? They kind of chill you out, right? I could get into some of this. There's no denying Impressionism has a look to it. The mixing of those colors, the palette that he's using, it looks good together. It's like you just can't make a mistake. He's made some, I've seen them, but gosh, not here. I think there's a successfulness to this, and they're void of busyness. I don't want to get into whatever my thoughts, but there's an absence of people. There's an absence of there is no edge to this. It's just where the painting stops. Like, I don't know where I am at in the water. They're very meditative. They are very much about the idea of seeing things. They're not about the actuality of seeing things. Do you see where realism gets to become sort of a complex conversation? Because it's not about the appearance of it. It's about that he is physically there, and this is his sensation of recording the things that he is seeing. Now, maybe he's revisiting, maybe he saw it earlier and he's trying to get that whatever is in his head, it's down onto the canvas. But it's not, it's not a lamentation. It's not an enunciation. It's not some sort of biblical this or that. It's not a portrait of a king or a queen, and it's not, it's none of that Baroque or Renaissance or neoclassical. It's not what is it? The death of Sardanapalus and all that, and the Sirius or the Raft of the Medusa. Like, isn't life already hard enough, right? Can I just sit and pause and sort of meditate for a moment on some pleasantness? Anyway, hey, I think that's why impressionistic art is, in a way, it's so popular. It does look good, and it's just a little break, right? Sometimes you just need a little break from all that seriousness. But I'm not looking into water lilies for any sort of like heavy content. Manet was so, he's so serious about like, hey, let's think about this, let's think about that. I don't think Monet is really wanting us to think about like the content. I think he wants us to think about the form. I mean, this is very surface. How does one make a painting? How does one record? That is the conversation. I'm certainly not looking to water lilies or any of the impressionists for that matter for like heavy content. They're trying to beat me over the head with like, oh, think about this. Where are the peasants? Like, oh, okay. Maybe next time. Let me just think on these for a moment. Renoir, I think for sure Renoir is of the same mindset. When I look at, listen, I don't speak French. What is this? Le Moulin de la, I need to get my friend to read this for me. Anyway, this is a dance at a place called the Windmill, and it's some sort of bread. Anyway, the Windmill is a popular location, right, in the city. And the mill would grind the flour, and with the flour, they made these little snacks or lunch treats or whatever. And then people are out, and look, you can see the light coming through the trees, and it's a young group of people, and it's definitely some mixing going on. There's upper class and I guess this hat must be in fashion because you can almost throw a rock and hit one. And, people are chatting and having a good time. And I think Renoir is like, hey, we've had some rough times. We're coming out of, I think there was, I forget what was going on in France in the mid 1800s. Maybe it was another war or something, right? And they're like, life is rough. Life can be tough. Sometimes we just need to, if we're going to be using art, shouldn't it be something pretty? Shouldn't it be something pleasant? Right? Shouldn't it be something about, something that we can enjoy? And these little lunch things that he's recording here, that's not what he always records, but this is what he's famous for as far as Impressionism goes. Renoir doesn't stay an Impressionist his entire career. I like to look at this one as evidence of, just like I looked at the Eakins, right? The guys jumping off the rocks. I like to look at Renoir's work here, and I see this curious thing happening where he's somewhat cropped. He's cropped the image. He's cropped the painting. And I say cropping of figures such as this only really occurs, I wish I could be like a painting forensic scientist. And it wouldn't be about the chemicals of the paint and all that. That's beyond me. But this evidence of cropping that shows up in these paintings, that means someone has looked at photography, because you don't see it. You don't really see it. They're not constructing paintings prior to photography where people get cropped like this, where you simply just sort of chop them out. That happens when you look through the little window in your camera. Some people make it, some people don't. And therefore they get cropped. That's a horrible example, but you see my point, right? Maybe this was the photo. Maybe that hand, wouldn't that be weird? Like if that was the camera and be like, well, what's that doing there? Oh, it just got cropped. Well, typically the painter would say, well, then forget that. I'm not going to record that. Here's the painting. But here Renoir says, no, I'm leaving stuff in. Could there be a camera involved? I don't know. Most of these people are models and friends and other artist friends that Renoir has, and they all look like they're having a pretty good time. Nice weather, definitely lunch, sun's out. Young group. I mean, this is about youth. This is about ephemeral moments. Having a good time. This is Impressionism. I'm looking at the palette. It's not a bazillion different colors like what Monet is using. It's actually a handful of colors. Check it out. Give it the old squint test. And you're like, oh yeah, there's really only, I drew all over this, but it's only actually a handful of colors, but it's the way he's treating the edges, right? How he's interested in the light. He's also interested in the activity. I would say this is as much as a good time as these are, except these are water lilies. What's Degas, D-E-G-A-S? What's he up to? Well, I'm saying overall, this is also about orange and blue. I'm also, remember when we talked about balance? I'll try not to draw all over this one. But isn't this one strongly informally balanced? Right down the middle, there's almost nothing. And then in this sea of orange, I'm giving this one figure in some sort of blue coat or some sort of blue shawl here. I mean, these are very composed. None of these, I mean, I don't want to get the idea that these are just snapshots. They're not really doing that. They're very sort of deeply thought out about placement. And yes, these, like I said, these are models and these are friends, but I'm fairly certain he got everyone together and put it together. Degas has this, has a feeling of this is that Baroque approach of people not even being aware of his presence, almost to the point of voyeurism. He's just sort of in the corner and he's sketching away, or maybe he's taking a picture, to where they're not paying attention to him anymore. They're not posing for him. You know what I'm saying? You ever done that where you take out your camera and all of a sudden someone starts, putting on their camera face and you're like, like don't even look over here. Just do what you're doing. Very difficult. Once people know the camera's on, they send it's artificial. They're not being natural anymore. I think Degas is sitting back long enough to where, you know, people just aren't paying attention to him. And, you know, is that cropping or what? I mean, there's just no excuse for someone, right, constructing an image, a painting where someone gets cut like that, unless they've seen photographs. I'm confident in saying that. I could be completely wrong, but I'm confident. So this is one of these compositional tools, this informal, it should be down in here, this informal balance. That comes from, now I'm not saying that the Japanese print invented informal balance. No, what I'm saying is that the Japanese print, which we're not looking at right now, uses a lot of informal balance, and that is influencing Degas' use of informal balance in his composition. It is definitely informal, right? Rule of thirds, hot spot.